totally different happy bucks by me. So if it's a really happy thing, I'm going to charge you $5 and you get a minute to share. And I have a fiver, so I will do it because I'm not going to. I'll lead from the front. You're coming up, yeah, General. You're coming on up. My happy fiver, my happy buck is Keith Simpson, right over there. Keith is the progeny of former jailer Mike Simpson, but he is also going to be joining Edward Jones on November the 7th and working out of my office. I'm really excited about that. So, got Keith Simpson.
Oh, Janie's that happy.
No.
Yeah, I was actually planning on giving 5 today anyway.
So it's worth 10 instead.
Sunday will mark 5 years since I moved to Oldham County and took over as publisher of the Oldham Era. So I don't know, maybe some of you aren't happy about that, but I've enjoyed my time here.
Yay. Hey.
I am really that happy. All right, so I got to know about 2 things. Number one, I haven't been it for a while because 3 weeks ago I had surgery that I'm happily a successful surgery. Prostate cancer. So that's it's been removed. I'm very happy about that. And the fact that I have a new president of our company that unfortunately I would love to have had, and I will definitely be bringing him to Rotary.
We'll hold you to that.
Like your clinical nurse specialist hat that says every one of the men in this room needs to know what their PSA is. Now, on that note, Lord, I'm happy because also to make my with Lieutenant Attorney General Daniel Cameron speaking next Tuesday is up to 319 people, and that's more than we've ever had.
That's right.
That's great.
Dr. Natalie Brown, new principal of
Oldham County High School.
Hey.
My daughter is a freshman year here. Thank you very much for taking good care of our kids. Anybody else? All right. We have a couple of birthdays. We celebrated Steve's last week on almost his birthday. We got a couple more coming. We're gonna just continue to recognize these birthdays for the month as well. A few announcements. 2 of them are not listed. I'm going to start with Sheriff Steve, who had something you wanted to share.
Yes, real quick, anybody who's going to Louisville after the meeting, you might want to take it out on this route. We had a tractor trailer flipped over southbound at 18 and about 20 minutes, 30 minutes ago, whatever. So it's going to take quite a while to upright it and get it out of the way. So I just thought I'd let everyone know that the track's going to be backed up a little bit southbound 71.
And should we also announce, and maybe Mark can help us with this, that you all, didn't you release yesterday that there's going to be a closure on southbound for like 10 days? Yeah, so that's going to be fun. So 71 joys continue, right? Thank you all very much. All right, I wanted to make sure we also were talking about greeter. Please make sure that we sign up as a greeter moving forward. Speak to Fran if you do have any questions about that. Rosemary was the last one on the list, so we don't want to have the next week's left out. So I'm also going to share that we're starting the Donut Polio Plus Donut fundraising effort very soon. The sign up was at the greeter stand. We raised about $1,000, a little bit more than $1,000 for our Rotary International effort to eradicate polio. That is not going away because polio, even in the virus-derived version, the shot-derived version, vaccine-derived version, is continuing to be something in New York City. So we're just being aware of that. The wild version, there was a significant movement toward probably being wild polio free as early as 2026, but with the virus, the vaccine derived virus coming on, it does look like there's some work to be done. So we got to keep raising that money. Thank you very much, Blaine, for that. And what was the other? Oh, the Day of Giving. We had the nonprofit spotlight last week that reminded of this, but this Thursday is the Day of Giving for the Community Foundation of Louisville. Don't ignore that. This is a very big deal for our local nonprofits to be loved on, so that we can keep doing the great work that communities like ours need. So thank you all very much for paying attention to that. All right, next meeting, of course, is here, and we will have our district governor for Rotary, Nancy Stearman, speaking to us. You can see the remainder. I also do want to have everybody remember the board meeting, which is always going to be that third Tuesday. So here we go. Thank you very much.
All right, fellow Rotarians and guests, I'm proud to introduce the 86th Secretary of State of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, Michael Adams. A few highlights from Michael's bio, and I promise not to go off script much. He gets a little nervous here. Michael was the first in his family to get a bachelor's degree from the state's best public college, the University of Louisville. From there, he went on to Harvard Law School. Did you know he served as Deputy General Counsel to Governor Ernie Fletcher before moving to Washington to accept an appointment as counsel to the U.S. Deputy Attorney General in the second Bush administration? In 2007, Michael began full-time private practice in election law, first as general counsel to the Republican Governors Association and later opening a national practice in the field. Because of his unique election experience in 2016, Michael was appointed to the Kentucky State Board of Elections, where he gained critical preparation for serving as the Commonwealth's chief election official. He was inaugurated as Secretary of State on January 6, 2020. And Michael first pushed his signature legislative issue, the Kentucky's first photo ID to vote law, through the General Assembly. Then, as we all know, 2020, we had a little something happen, the pandemic. He pivoted to saving the primary and general elections from the problems that befell other states during the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021, Adams presented state legislators with the most ambitious election reform plan since 1891, and the bill passed both chambers with near unanimous support. Michael's work has earned praise throughout America and across party lines. On a side note, Michael is in the minority, in that he is one of the few constitutional office holders not running for governor. We're going to give Michael as much time to speak and also answer questions. I will say, if we do go a little bit past 1 o'clock, if you do need to leave, we certainly understand and won't take offense to that. So with that, Rotarians and guests, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Secretary of State Michael Adams.
I think it's hard to find some unity here after those polarizing remarks about Uville and UK.
Wasn't in the bio.
Well, thank you all so much for coming today for this. I want to thank especially the Uville Live and Spectrum News for joining us as well. They're here just in case I make a mistake, but that's perfectly fine. But they have been here today as well. First, before I get into the meat of my remarks, a couple of thoughts about the Rotary. The Rotary's made a big difference in my life. This is a third Rotary I've spoken to in the last 2 weeks. I spoke in Paducah and then to the Lexington Rotary and now you all today. And when I was 17, I was a good student, but not especially with a sense of direction. And I was chosen the junior Rotarian in September of 1993 from Reedland High School in Paducah, Kentucky. And they sent me downtown to the Rotary meeting, and the speaker was, I think, a 32-year-old state auditor named Ben Chandler. Before he was Attorney General, before he was in Congress, he was a very youthful state auditor and came all the way to Paducah and spoke at the Paducah Rotary. I had never met anybody important before, anybody in government, anybody from outside of my county, I think, at that point. He was very gracious. He was very informative. And on some level, I think subconsciously, that experience made me interested in politics and made me interested in public service. And so the Rotary really influenced my life in that way. And now it's a little funny because I talk to Ben just about every single day. He's on the State Board of Elections where I serve as the chair, and we talk constantly about our election process. And it really is a small world. Here's a larger thought about the Rotary. I don't have to tell you that things are pretty ugly out there, out here right now in our society. I'm reading a book right now called Bowling Alone. You've probably heard of it. It's been out for 20 years. There's a second edition that just came out recently. It's about how people are disengaging civically. And I think that's why tempers are so hot right now. People are so mistrustful of each other right now, is we just don't have enough things like this where people come together and get a plate of food and sit down with other people in the community and just talk and just be human. We're off in our own little echo chambers online with our own kind, and we shoot at the other side, and we just don't have enough things like this. And so the Rotary is really important. Groups like the Rotary and the Kiwanis, you all are the glue that holds our society together at the seams. So thank you for doing this. I'm glad you still do this every week. So the theme of my remarks today is it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. Here's the great irony. I serve as your chief election official, and I can tell you, and your clerk can tell you as well, that elections in Kentucky have never in our history been more secure than they are today. They've never been more transparent than they are today. So we're a real national success story. I do as many national interviews as I do local interviews because word's getting around our country how Kentucky has risen from the bottom to the top in improving our processes. So there's a great story to tell, and I'm going to tell you that story today. It's also the worst of times. It's also a literally dangerous time to be an election official. It's unacceptable. It's scary out there. I'm going to give you some things of concern to me as I watch this process. And then I'll endeavor to close on a happy note, tell you about some things that we're doing to try to combat these problems. And then I'll make sure I leave some time for questions as well. So first, let's talk about security. I'll walk you through the things that we did in 2020 and 2021 to improve security. And then I'll give you a short legislative update, what we've done in 2022 to improve security and access at the same time. But there's one thing I want to leave with you. If there's only one thing that you take away today, it's this. We found a special sauce in Kentucky. We're the only place in America, the only state, they haven't figured this out in Congress either. We're the only place in America that's making it easier to vote and harder to cheat at the same time. And there's no trade-off required. You can make it easy to vote, but still make it hard to cheat. You don't have to have fraud just because you made it easy to vote. But you also don't have to keep people from voting to make it secure. There's a false choice that people around our country are making in legislatures and Congress. And Kentucky's found the right answer of both and, security and accessibility. So in 2020, the main issue that I ran on in 2019 and scored an upset victory on by making the campaign a referendum on it, essentially was photo ID to vote. Our neighboring states have photo ID to vote. I just got back from Rhode Island, where my wife is from, where my in-laws live. We visited them over the holiday. They've got photo ID to vote, and they're a very left-leaning state. It's not a partisan issue, but I just don't have the street cred to explain to my voters they should trust our process. If we don't even ask people to identify who they are when they vote. So that's the first thing I wanted to do when I got sworn in. One is to close the obvious loophole, but the other rationale was just so that Kentuckians would trust me as I try to implement other improvements to our system. So we implemented photo ID to vote. There was a great deal of gnashing of teeth. I was sued 3 times over that to strike it down, but we won all of our lawsuits, and photo ID to vote is the law of our land in Kentucky. That was just the beginning. There were other things that we had to do. Another one was to clean up our voter rolls. A federal judge in Frankfurt, before I took office, this has been about 4 or 5 years ago now, found that our state was deficient and violated federal law in failing to keep our rolls accurate. We've taken 130,000 dead voters off of our voter rolls in 2.5 years. Here's why that's important. 2 reasons. Number one, obviously, you've got a loophole people can use to commit fraud. If there's a dead person on the rolls and they can get access to be able to falsify that person's identity. And we've not seen this in Kentucky under my administration, but in our neighboring states, there actually have been fraud cases brought and convictions obtained for people voting in the names of dead people. Obviously, that's unacceptable. But here's the other reason. It also makes the lines longer. When the rolls are bloated, that just takes that much longer for the poll worker to find you on the list and get you signed in and get you to vote. And there's also the credibility problem. If you walk up to vote and they don't ask for your ID, you probably doubt the process. But same here. If you walk up and you see your neighbor who's deceased or your parent who's deceased on the rolls, how much are you going to trust this process? Well, we're not doing this in a partisan way. Every single month we put out a full report of who we took off and what the rationale was. We always show our cards, but it's important to have these rolls kept up to date. So in 2020, of course, we had a very unique situation. I'm pleased to tell you that in 2020, Kentucky had a uniquely safe, secure, and successful election. It was safe. Other states did not make changes that we did, and they literally lost lives because of it. We had no detectable spread of COVID-19 in 2020 in Kentucky tied to our voting. Other states did. If there's anything that I am proud of, that I will always be proud of, is that we literally saved lives and we didn't let COVID-19 suppress voting. We had a secure election. We made changes to our process to make sure people would safely vote. And there were the sort of irresponsible allegations of fraud that we now see commonly these days. They were all bunked. They were all debunked. We actually had a more secure election with fewer problems than we had ever seen in modern times. We had one instance of 3 million people voting in Kentucky, but one instance of someone trying to cheat. He asked for an absentee ballot. We sent it to him, and he showed up to vote in person. The next day, the absentee ballot came in the mail. Well, we didn't count it. We're not dumb. We didn't count the second vote, and we sent this guy off to be prosecuted, referred him to the grand jury. So the system works. We can catch these people. So we had a safe election, secure election, and a successful one. Highest turnout ever in a primary, highest turnout ever in a general. So the lessons that we learned from this going into 2021 were a couple of things. One is, as I said, you can make it easy to vote, hard to cheat simultaneously. And so we did that. We expanded early voting. We made it easier to get an absentee ballot, but we also improved security. We banned ballot harvest. We provided by law for a system of tracking absentee ballots. So they're not just kind of floating around out there. Every single one of them is surveilled and tracked. We transitioned away from electronic voting machines to universal paper ballots. This is not an issue from 2020 specifically. It's something that I had to do quickly because we were voting more absentee than we usually do. But it's something that I promised to do in my campaign because as I travel all around the state, people told me they don't necessarily trust electronics the way they trust a piece of paper. We had a state rep race in Owensboro 4 years ago where there was a tie and they couldn't do a recount because there weren't ballots. There were just machines, but no ballots. So the best part about the paper ballots is voters trust them, but also they put them in the machine, they get scanned, they get counted, and then they fall down into a little slot in the machine. You can open it up and hand count and check against the machine count, make sure that that's right. Now, as I'll get into later, I don't think that should be done selectively or politically. It should be done objectively and randomly through an audit process that we've gotten enacted. But in any event, I'm glad that we've made that transition. And fortunately, the cost of that has not been borne by your county. We've drawn down nearly $20 million in federal funds to help pay for this. In a moment, I'll tell you about the state funds as well. So it's a lot of good news here. The cure process used to be that if we got an absentee ballot back and it looked like it wasn't signed by the voter when we compared the signatures, we threw it out. I'm not criticizing anybody. That was the state of the law. But we changed the law where now we actually have to contact the voter and double check. That's good for access because it re-enfranchises people whose ballots may have been thrown out just because their signature looks different today than when they registered to vote a long time ago. It's also good though for security because it means that if someone's trying to falsify your identity, I want you to know about it. And I want to know about it too and refer it to the Attorney General. So these are changes that we learned in 2020 worked. We did them through emergency powers in 2020. The voters liked them on both sides. The other thing that we got right here, the other lesson that we learned is you got to do this in a bipartisan way. The mistake that some states are making in our country is they're doing election policy on party lines. And even if I don't necessarily quibble with what's in those pieces of legislation, it's a terrible look. It looks like one party is trying to take over the election system and rig the rules for their side because they're not doing the kind of outreach that we've done. On the other hand, the other political party in Congress is doing something similar. They're trying to pass a federal law that would overturn all 50 states' election laws and impose a national election code and federalize our election process. Well, that is just as bad a look, maybe worse. They have one party take over the elections nationally. The right way to do it is the way that I've chosen to do it, which is to get everybody at the table and be fair and listen and make sure you're not discriminating against anybody and be humane and take the best ideas and put them into practice. I believe that's why we've seen the turnout go up in part is because voters have a renewed confidence in our process. And so there's of course, a lot of dissent out there. I recognize that, but I think voters as a whole actually support what we've done and are embracing it. So I told you about the best of times. Let me tell you about the worst of times. When I ran for this job, the first thing I would have to answer in terms of the question for the audience is, what does the Secretary of State do? People had no idea what the Secretary of State in this state or any state really did. We were paper pushers and ribbon cutters, and that was about the extent of our public persona. I never thought I would get death threats. I never thought my staff would get threats. I never thought the clerks would be harassed. I never saw this coming. I don't think any of us did. It is an unusual time in politics today. And to be sure, it's not just me. It's not just the election officials. It's health officials, it's school board members. Everyone's getting abuse. It's unacceptable. You can be a principled conservative like I am and believe in a limited role for the government without believing that government employees are to be subjected to abuse. I'm going to tell you about some things that we passed in this session. First, we asked for and got $25 million of state funding to upgrade our machines. We actually got a law passed that says by the last day of my term in office, first term, we'll see how many terms there are, but the end of my current term of office, by the end of that term, every single vote in Kentucky will be cast on a piece of paper, subject to a paper trail. They can be audited, every single one. We were totally electronic when I took office just a couple of years ago. That's a major achievement. We also increased base funding for your county election officials. We have laws that say that they're supposed to get X amount of base funding, and then for years, the legislature under both parties suspended those laws and offered less money. Now our elections are fully funded, plus there's additional funds for the machines. We've put video surveillance on our ballot boxes, not while you're voting, obviously it's a ballot. But now that we have multiple days of voting, now that we've brought early voting to Kentucky, like almost every other state has, the machines are out for a longer period of time and they need to be under surveillance when they're not in use. So that's something else that we got done in this session. We made it a crime to connect our machines to the internet. There's no good reason why in the world we would want to connect a voting machine to the internet. I have no idea why anyone would ever do that. But we haven't in Kentucky and we never will. And in fact, we got a law passed to make that a felony if anybody even tries to do that. We expanded voting hours. First, early voting. Look, I'm really proud of that. I think that's my most significant achievement. It's not a new idea though, because we actually had multiple days to vote in the 1700s and the 1800s. In 1891, our fourth state constitution, our current one, dialed that back to one default day, but it gave the General Assembly authority to expand voting if they chose. Well, they didn't choose. They kind of sat on it for 130 years. We were long overdue to catch up with the rest of the country and give our voters more than one day to vote. But we also in this session expanded the number of hours for that, a number of days for that. So there's a total of 10 days to vote if you count the in-person absentee plus the early, plus of course election day. Unfortunately, one of the bills that we had to pass this year was one to make it a felony to intimidate election officials, to harass election officials. This kind of a law shouldn't even really be necessary. Sadly, it is. So I'll tell you about some of the challenges that we're facing for November. And again, I'll try to leave on a happy note and then take some questions. They come right now in a couple of forms. One is frivolous recount efforts. We have candidates who lost by very, very wide margins, non-competitive races. One of them was a fellow in the 5th district of Kentucky, which is about 40 counties. It's a huge district. He lost 82% to 6% against Hal Rogers and said, fraud, I want to recount. Look, the reason I've transitioned Kentucky away from electronic machines into paper ballots that run through scanners and then you double check them, there's a good reason for that. It's because I want transparency. I want to be able to check these things out. But they can't be done in a political way or an accusatory way without evidence. And they can't be done in an intimidating or harassing way. So we actually called bluff on a couple of these, and we performed recounts in a state senate district in Northern Kentucky, in a state representative district in Central Kentucky. And both times the count came back the same. And so then these folks said, oh, you stuffed the ballot boxes. We got you. The only way you can make the count match is to have stuffed the ballot boxes. The goalposts always get moved. We debunk every crazy thing that they say, and then they just change the argument with no shame whatsoever. I wish I could laugh about this, but unfortunately it's getting to be a real problem. We've had about half a dozen county clerks resign in the past 6 weeks. In 2020, as brutal as an election year as that was for our clerks, having to turn on a dime and expand absentee voting and expand the number of days of voting to weeks to make sure we could accommodate all the crowds, we only lost 2 county clerks. And now we've lost triple that number. That really gives you a sense of how much harder this job is today for our clerks, for our election personnel, than it was as bad as 2020 was for all of us. It's even harder now. I am concerned about getting enough poll workers. It takes an army of 15,000 poll workers in Kentucky to run the statewide election. 15,000. I've got a staff of about 35. You can do the math. I can't do this by myself. I've got to have volunteers. And the crazier this gets and the more unpleasant this gets for people who are volunteering to be part of our process, the more they're falsely accused of corruption and committing crimes, the less they want to volunteer. This is not a new problem, to be sure. I was elected in 2019, and 2 weeks after that, I was invited to the legislature to testify about challenges that we were facing in our elections. And I told them that we have a crisis brewing with respect to poll workers. That was before COVID. COVID did not help. Most of our poll workers are senior citizens. And as they age out, I need younger people to take their place. And that job gets even harder when I've got people falsely accusing the clerks and me of running these rigged elections. It's just total nonsense. Another way that they are attacking our system is through open records requests. And again, here, look, I don't want anyone to be, anyone to feel that they don't have access to public records. I've got a sworn duty to follow the law, and one of those laws is the Open Records Act. We get open records requests every day. We're happy to do them. But to give you just a recent example, the pillow guy took a shot at our clerks a few weeks ago on a show, and then suddenly they were deluged by requests. And a lot of those requests made no sense. They were just gibberish. And our clerks would call the requester and say, what are you looking for? They'd say, I don't know. Michael and Bill told me to send this to you. Sometimes they do send things that aren't gibberish, but they're basically things that would shut down the clerk's office. Our clerks are working really hard to prepare for this November election. You don't just do elections 2 days a year. Elections are a major, major undertaking that take an immense amount of labor and effort. And our folks are working really hard to get their machines ready, get their sites ready. I'm meeting with your clerk and other local officials today to talk about your plan for Oldham County. So another video came out last week against me from the same individual. Last I checked, it had 75,000 views. I don't think I'm going to get 75,000 records requests, but I might get 50,000. The goal here is not to ensure transparency and trust in our process. And I can prove it. The same people that said we just want to recount to check the tech, they changed the argument to say, oh, you stole the election by stuffing the ballot boxes because the tech worked and matched, therefore you must have cheated. Their goal is to reduce confidence in our process. Same here. The stuff that we're being asked for is from 2020. They had a year and a half to ask for this stuff. And now they're waiting until the last minute as we're groaning under the weight of trying to put this election on for November, and suddenly they're deluding us with these things. The goal is clear. The goal is to destabilize our election system and destabilize our democracy. I'm not putting up with it, and I don't think you all will either. So let's find some good news to talk about. Well, my time's running out. So in all seriousness, here's what I'm doing about it. I was asked yesterday by a reporter, what's your solution? I said, no one gave me a magic wand when I got sworn in. I don't have a magic wand, but here's what I'm doing to try to combat this problem. I think the key insight here is voters just don't know enough. They don't know enough about how the government works. They don't know enough about how the process works. And I think it's a major failing of our education system here in Kentucky. I went to look this up because I'm kind of a history nerd. And if you go back and you look at the debates in the General Assembly in the mid 1800s, if you look at the constitutional conventions, the reason that we have public education in Kentucky in the Constitution, the reason it was created was not to train people for jobs. That is certainly a worthy goal that I share. I've got a daughter turning 16 next week, and I want her to have all the world open to her. But the fact is, the reason they did this 200 years ago was not so people could get jobs. Back then, we were an almost entirely agricultural economy. Everybody worked on the farm. No one needed to school to train them to go get a job. The reason that we founded public education in Kentucky is to train citizens, not workers. To train citizens. The view was we have to have a population that is capable of rational self-government, or the system is not going to persist. It's going to dissolve into anarchy or worse. You can see that those views, I think, have a lot of salience. And yet today, the last priority that our schools have, I'm not picking on anybody, this is universal almost, is they're not prizing civic education above other forms of education. Look, they're responding to the market. They're responding to the need for STEM education and everything else. They're unfortunately having to pick up where parents have dropped the ball and teach socializing and all that behavior. And unfortunately, we've gotten away from teaching civics to our kids, and they don't understand how the world works. I can't do anything about the absence of civic education in the last several decades. I never had civics education. I had to teach myself, but we're trying to bring it back. So I'm working with a coalition of educators and civic activists and others. It's a bipartisan group. We've got Republicans and Democrats on it. We're putting together a model curriculum to share with our educators for them to implement it into their education, into their plan. I'm not a top-down guy. I don't think that I should be able to dictate, or even the legislature should dictate what you got to teach in your classroom. But it's purely voluntary and purely free. We're going to give model curricula to our educators and hope that they'll implement it into their teaching. Again, this is a long process with a long fix, but we're starting now. So I see it's 12:54. I'll take any questions or comments you have. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yes, sir.
Secretary,
Yes, sir.
one of the key things that you bring up is when it comes to print versus digital.
Yeah.
Being in a marketing field, and we get beat up about the print versus digital ourselves. How have you found since doing this that it alleviates any of the worries? And what would you say is your cost? I'm sure it's probably costs more to do it in print rather than digital.
Well, I'm going to take your question and take it in maybe a slightly different direction. I think one of the problems that we have is that people are not reading. And I'm not being sarcastic, but newspaper circulation, of course, is in decline. Instead of subscribing to a newspaper, especially a community newspaper, and learning about what's going on in a community, instead they're watching cable television. I'm not picking on one part or the other because both sides do it. That has a couple of effects. Number one, the cable networks are designed to market to just one side or the other side of the divide and to not give an objective viewpoint of the news. But the other, of course, is they don't cover local news. And so that means there's not coverage of what's going on locally. And that lends to people disengaging civically because they're not involved and they're not knowledgeable. So I do think that you'll see, I know that they're seeing this right now in Jefferson County, there's a renewed interest in local issues. But unless people are actively seeking out and engaging news like this and rejecting just opinion as news, it's going to be hard for us to become informed. So that's actually one of the points that we're going to be stressing and what we're coming up with is, hey, look, I like watching TV too, but make sure you read something. And if you think it's biased, read something on the other side.
Secretary, I've been watching this election recounts and whatever's been going on, and as you said, check the tape. It looks like it's been corrected. One vote maybe changed because somebody, got kicked out because they didn't fill out the ballot correctly, whatever. What can you do? And there's got to be some dark money or some, to fund these recounts or whatever's coming from somewhere, for the amount of dollars. What can you do and what can we do and in the state to address some of these things, like you say, keep changing the goalpost moving forward or whatever. And I think that's very disheartening that, you check the tech and it looks like it's working just exactly the way it was designed to work, and yet that doesn't satisfy that a particular group.
Well, thank you for that question. That's actually part of my motive for being here today. You all are community leaders. You are thought leaders, opinion leaders in your community. There are certain people that will never believe me because I'm the government. And I think a lot of this phenomenon is not really about the election process. It's not about the machines. It's not about anything. It's really about paranoia. And I see a lot of crossover people who believe that the machines are rigged by Venezuelan socialists, also believe that the COVID vaccine has a microchip so the government can track you. There's a lot of commonality in those viewpoints. And so, look, I'll never convince those people because I'm a public official, I'm the government. The same thing if the media say something, if they debunk something, they say, well, that was the media that did that. You can't trust the media. Look, there's nothing I can do to reason with those folks. And there's also folks that get it, that understand this is actually going pretty well. But there's a large group in the middle. And so what I would respectfully ask you all to do, if you feel comfortable with it, is just take some facts that you've gotten from whether from me or your clerk or others, and just share those with people that you hear express doubt. Look, there's no shame in having doubt. It's appropriate. You should always question what the government's doing and get answers. But there's a large constituency in the middle that needs to hear from our side the way they're hearing from the other side.
Hi, Secretary. Would you expand on your description of how you're keeping absentee ballots and honest process, please?
Sure. And if I could, let me give you just a little bit of context. Kentuckians like to vote in person. When we only had just one day to vote, they would still crowd the polls on election day. About 98% of voters would vote in person, and about 2% would vote absentee. In Kentucky, we don't have no excuse absentee like most states do. We have excuse absentee, which is to say the expectation is that you're going to present yourself at the polls in person to vote unless you fit into one of about a dozen criteria. Your age, your health, a disability, you're out of the county on election day. There's a list of medical emergency, things like that. Even like a surgery schedule. We have all those in our law. So we have a very modest use of absentee voting. And way more than 2% of our voters qualify to vote absentee, but nevertheless, they choose to vote in person if they can. That's our culture and our heritage, and that's how people choose to vote. I personally don't really care one way or the other how people choose to vote, except that an absentee ballot costs about twice as much as an in-person ballot systemically. So we can keep our costs down better if we encourage in-person voting. That was part of the rationale of expanding early voting versus expanding absentee. But with respect to how we monitor for this, so number one, it was a very small proportion that vote absentee. In 2020, of course, we had a great equalization for obvious reasons, but in 2021, we had special elections that went back down to about 3 or 4% absentee. In our primary this year in May, about the same thing. Even though we had a lot of absentee utilization in COVID, it's gone back to normal. And by the way, this is Democrats too. Even Democrats, you see a lot of partisan debates about the voting method, but in Kentucky, at least, Democrats prefer to vote in person as well. We do a few things with these. One is the portal. The portal allows us to track every single ballot electronically. We don't know who you voted for, of course, but we're able to track it, track the envelope that the ballot is in with the barcode. That enables not just me and the Attorney General, but also enables the voter to track that ballot 24/7 on her smartphone at home and see where it is in the process. Did your clerk get your application? And by the way, we check photo ID too. We're one of only a few states that checks photo ID for an absentee ballot. But you can check our website. You can see, did your clerk get your application? Did your clerk send the ballot? And did your clerk get the ballot back and count your vote? That's the kind of stuff you got a right to know. I lived in Washington DC for several years, and I still voted here absentee. And I would call and bug my clerk, hey, did you get my ballot? I get it. I want my vote to be counted and know it's been counted. And so we've done that as well. So the first part is the portal. That's maybe the most important part. But the second is the secure process. So we're checking the signatures and notifying voters if we see a mismatch. And that's good for, as I said, a couple different reasons. And finally, we banned ballot harvesting. Ballot harvesting is a very pernicious form of essentially vote trafficking. This led to election fraud, including criminal convictions and imprisonments here in Kentucky. But we had to come up with different ways to prosecute it because it wasn't strictly forbidden previously. Now it is. Yes.
With more and more early voting, do you see a change in regulations about closing school for voting days? And because it seems like.
I see your clerk commenting on that one.
I know it's not buildings in the state,
Yeah.
Now more and more doing that, would that be, since they don't vote, would that be a possibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a matter of law in our election code, we actually give election officials the ability of functionally eminent domain to come in and literally seize, if you will, a public building, including a school. If it's paid for by taxpayers, then as a matter of law, the election officials can come get it and make it a voting location. Now, obviously, that should be done cautiously and politely. And has to be worked out in a compromise with the school district. But you raised a great question. With early voting, and let me just step back for just a second. In our main primary, most of our voters chose to vote in person on election day, and that is when we have the most locations, and that's kind of our pattern and practice. But I do think early voting is going to take off in the future. It'll take a few election cycles for people to get adjusted to it, to know the polls are always open early, not just on one day between 6 and 6. We had our staff look at this in West Virginia, Ohio, Tennessee, all neighboring states, all red states, candidly. They've all had early voting for many years. And it took a few cycles for it to catch on, but eventually it caught on, and now they have huge swaths of utilization of early voting. Like here too, like I don't care how you vote. Vote early, don't vote early, it doesn't make a difference to me. But I do want Kentuckians hoping to embrace early voting so we can keep it, but also so we don't crowd the polls on election day.
Would you be willing to comment? You talked a little bit about some of your election recounts. As you know, we had one in Oldham County with the state rep seat here, the last election. Would you be willing to comment on that one?
Which race was that?
It was with the Speaker of the House, David Osborne's race.
Well, there was a recount in that race.
Well,
There was
a
one
recount
pursuit.
request, I should say.
Yeah. So I don't have a whole lot more to add except this. That was a race that was decided by 36 percentage points. It wasn't remotely close. The individual who asked for that recount has attacked not just my integrity and the clerk's integrity, but also the judge presiding over the case, the integrity of the judge, made a number of false allegations about us being in some conspiracy. It's just paranoia, unfortunately. And the stigma that we used to have in politics about don't say crazy stuff or wrong stuff has kind of gone away. There's not much disincentive anymore to not just do it. But I do feel like we've survived that. I do feel like now that we've done a couple of recounts and called their bluff, eventually they'll move on. And my concern is they'll find some other way to disrupt our election process. I don't know. Yes.
Mr. Secretary, I recently read an opinion piece in the Grange Journal dealing with the restoration of voting rights for convicted felons. What is your stance on a convicted felon receiving their voting rights at the end of their sentence or their probationary period versus what the state law is today? And also, how can a person today have their rights restored?
Let me answer the second one first. The way an individual can have rights restored is to make a request to the governor. The governor has pardon authority. The governor can issue a full pardon, partial pardon, a restoration of rights, right to own firearms, right to vote, some or all of the above, none of the above. It's at the discretion of the governor. The first question was, what should we do with respect as a matter of policy for voting rights for convicted felons? Here's my view. What we've had the last several governors is sort of a ping pong whiplash approach to this issue. Governor Patton, a Democratic governor, issued an amnesty and just permitted any person who had been convicted of a felony and served time to vote. Governor Fletcher, a Republican, came after him and revoked that. And then the first Governor Beshear came in, a Democrat, and put it back. And then Bevin, a Republican, took it away. And now Andy Beshear put it back. That is not the way to make policy. This should not, and no disrespect to the governor, I don't think any governor should have the power with the stroke of the pen to decide whether people can vote or not.
Amen.
I think that's a dangerous way to do business.
Right.
My view is this. I think I favor permitting these folks to vote, but I think it should be done in a constitutional way. I think that we should pass, and the 6 Senate has passed. It didn't get through the House, so it's not on the ballot. But I think that at the legislative level, we should have a constitutional amendment proposed for the people of Kentucky and let them decide.
Mhm.
And I think that the people should be part of the process. The legislature should be part of the process, and it shouldn't be held to the whims of individuals who are in the governor's bench.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
I read a statistic that over half the counties in Kentucky have more registered voters than residents of voting age, and that includes Oldham County. You talked about removing 130,000 dead voters. Could you discuss your efforts to take those folks, most of them who have moved, off of the voter rolls?
Yeah, first, I don't know that statistic is up to date. That was a statistic that was brought in litigation against the office before I got here successfully. I don't think that's accurate today. I think the improvements that we've made in the last few years have made that obsolete. But your point's well taken. Let me tell you what we've done, and let me tell you what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do. What we are allowed to do in our office is to review the rolls and look for people who are deceased, look for people who have been sent to prison and are in prison for a felony, have not yet served their time, people who've been judgmentally incompetent and not competent to vote. Under the state constitution, they're allowed to vote. And so we have stepped that up. But there's another constituency, which is people who aren't any of those. People who have voted in our state in the past, and then they move away and they don't deregister. And look, I'll confess to you, when I moved to Washington, D.C., I didn't deregister. I just assumed that the states talk to each other. Well, sometimes they don't. We have a partnership with about 30 states where we trade information back and forth. We take people off our rolls based on what we get from Tennessee and Wyoming and vice versa. Here's what you can expect by the end of the year. There's a federal law that limits my ability to do a mass purge of the rolls going into the election. You can see that would be the case. After the November election, we're scheduled to remove approximately 138,000 voters more from the rolls. It might be higher. The way that we have gotten the information is in 2020 and in 2022, we sent out postcards to people on our quote inactive list, people who we have evidence have moved to some other state and are voting in other states. This is required by law. We send them a notice. And if they don't respond and they don't vote and don't change their information, then we're then eligible to take them off the rolls. The law requires that this happen over 2 cycles. So I had to send them a mailer in 2020 and again this year. But now we've got those mailers back, all the undeliverables. We are permitted to do that purge after November 8th. We're not allowed to do it before by law, but we're able to do it after. But my goal, if I can work it out technologically, is to put the name of every single person on that list on our website and say, hey, go check our website, make sure we're not making a mistake. We're not trying to pick anyone off who's legit. If we can be transparent that way, we'll do it that way.
So Secretary, we got one more question. I just wanted to make everybody aware. It is 1:10 if you need to leave. I understand.
Why only 30 states that are reciprocating information?
I'm sorry?
Why only 30 states that are reciprocating information?
Because the others have chosen not to participate. I'm not sure why. Well, I'll give you a couple of speculative reasons. One is voter rolls. Maybe this is not a very popular policy in some political quarters because it begins to look like voter suppression. I think that's wrong. In fact, if you look at the history of this law, the law that requires the voter rolls to be kept up to date was passed by Democratic Congress and signed by Bill Clinton when he was president. To me, there's no partisanship with this stuff, but I think states that are more left-leaning just don't want to be part of this because they want to be charged with voter suppression. And I think there are some states on the right, I know of at least one, Louisiana, that based on misinformation about our process, withdrew from that partnership. And this is based on crazy blogging, not any actual findings of any actual wrongdoing or anything of that nature. So unfortunately, you've had some states basically get cold feet because of misinformation, and then you've had some that just don't want to partner generally in this, and so that leaves 30 of us or so in the middle.
All right, time for one more question. One more question, anybody?
Could you clarify that last comment? Is that part of Eric?
Yes.
Secretary.
Okay.
Hey, thank you.
I want to see the sheriff giving the secretary the payoff.
Yeah.
Oh.
They all know it's not a coin. We'll show it to them. They'll be okay with it.
All right.
On behalf of the Grange Rotary Club, we want to present to you the coin. It's not a Bitcoin. I just want you to understand. It is a coin with the 4-way test on the back, which I'm sure you're aware of.
Yes.
And, it's our object is to eradicate polio, and we wish to present that to you. Mr. Secretary.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, now, last order of business every time. Little red ticket, get one out now. This one was dropped. Thank you, Rosemary, for finding it. You are missing a ticket. This is Ted. Is this yours? Seriously? Is it the truth? All right, I'll hold it up for you if you win. Okay. All right, I'm going to spin for the first one. Judge Vogel, would you please turn the drum here and there was
Cardinal red.
There we go. Go Cards. There was $75 at least in the split the pot today. Josh was counting more, so actually it could be more than that. The number. Those are your tickets. I forgot he was in it.
Uh-oh. 138. All right.
All right. So the rule is it's got to go around twice, right, Robert? It's got to go around twice. And if you land on red, you get $40. If you land on the rotary seal, you get at least 75. If you get anything else, then by golly, you're going to get some hometown pizza.
There we go.
Hey, it's a $40 winner. All right. Congratulations. All right, everybody. What a treat it was today to have Secretary Adams and his team. Thank you very, very much for being here. Everybody have a great day.
There you, sir. Miranda said hello. I'll do it next week. That's all like that. All right. And so Jared, yeah. Gotta do I'm very excited.
You would normally pay there. I don't know as president. Indeed. Yeah.
We only have a spot. Let's do it. Thank you.
I heard it's Is this as entertaining as your favorites?
Do a good job.
Yeah, I think it's getting a little bit better. Yeah, we got
The guy that was here from the Baptist, is he right there?
Yeah.
Okay. What does he do?
He's the president of and I think he does president of pharmacy. Yeah, and that's why they're bringing the pharmacy headquarters up here.
Because he mentioned something about, somebody was asking me about one of the expansion projects that we're heavily involved in. I'm sure that's a good thing. Everybody, everybody else, because there's us, there's electric contractors, general contractors.